Hi everyone, welcome to another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. The second live stream that we're doing for the OTD Normandy Month. Hopefully I won't have any internet troubles today. I think I solved the problem, so that's good. I'm going to just do a quick introduction. Excited to have Kevin Lambie on today talking about the Regina Rifles on D-Day and D+1. Like I already said on social media, the slideshow is going to be good. It's going to seem longer just because we can't zoom in anymore. For some reason, I can't do that with the software, so it's not so bad, but it's going to be a good one. So it's good to have the extra details and be able to see things, and particularly with the things that Kevin's put together. There's lots of good stuff here. So I'm really excited for this. And also, obviously, as I'm sure many of you know, the assault phase is one of my really strong research interest, especially this particularly part of Juno Beach, which we'll get into a bit. Because again, I saw the slides and Kevin's got lots of detail for us. So it's going to be a good one. So I'm excited. So we're just going to get right into it. Hey, Kevin, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Brett. Thanks. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Like I said, you've got lots of detail lined up for us. You already anticipated my question that I always ask off the hop, so we don't really need to ask it because you're going to go into it on your own. So that's always good when the guest is nice and prepared. So we'll get the slideshow up and running right away. So, do you want to tell us real quick what we're going to be looking at?
Sure. So I wanted to take a run through sort of the experiences of the Regina Rifles on D-Day, try to put some information together. There's lots of information out there, but trying to fit it all into sort of an overall narrative or flow is a little difficult. So I've tried to do that a little bit. So that's my intention, and then take them through D+1 when they sort of got onto their D-Day objectives. And that leads into Sean Clacton's presentation that he did for you a few months ago of the bridgehead battles around Bretteville and so on.
Yep.
So this is a painting by Orville Fisher showing the landing by the Reginas. Orville Fisher landed at Courseulles, so it was probably not far behind the Reginas, and sort of recorded what he saw there. This is one of two paintings that he did. There's another one that shows sort of another aspect of the landings. That's the one that appears on the front of the Regimental History, Look to Your Front by Terry Kopp. The quote there is from the 1946 Battalion History. That section was written by then Lieutenant Gordon Baird. He was the intelligence officer on D-Day, so responsible for the war diaries, as you see on my website, and sort of maintaining historical and tactical kind of information for the unit. And as I said, involved in the creation of the first history immediately after the war.
Yep.
And next, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of people that are sort of important to this research, sort of dedicate them to a little bit. On the right is my great uncle, Donald Morrison. He landed on D-Day as a reinforcement and was posted to the Reginas later on that day. Was with the Reginas for about a month and was killed in July, the day of the attack on Carpiquet. So my website began as researching this great uncle, trying to determine what I could figure out about his experience. And I found myself wanting to dig deeper than just he was a Regina. So what else could I find out about? What company was he in? Where was he at? What was his involvement with those bridgehead battles and so on? So that started my research as I was trying to find that stuff, and was ultimately only moderately successful. It was difficult to know for sure, but I was coming across other information about, things like, what companies were other people in, what training did they have, who had this specialization, and so on. Started recording some of that information and thinking other people might have the same questions that I have, and so on. So that was sort of the genesis of the website. Get some research material up, and then have an email contact on there for people that wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and I could look through some of my records and provide them some additional information, sort of drill down a little bit deeper, and go from the level of 800 men in a battalion down to maybe 100 guys in a company, and where they were and what happened and so on.
Yep. And just real quick for everyone watching now and for later, the website is linked down below in the description. So anyone who wants to check it out, which I highly suggest you do once we're even finished, especially it's a good time for this time of year to go look, because it's extremely detailed, lots of good stuff on there and things that are great to see. And I use it all the time when I'm digging on this stuff. So it's a great resource.
Okay, and the other fellow on the left is Walter Keith, good friend of mine that I met through the Regimental Association. He commanded a Regina's platoon in early 45. He came to the unit, and he was always extremely keen on the history of the unit and getting things documented, elaborating on information that's out there, filling in details, getting details correct, and so on like that. And so we did a fair bit of work together, researching things. In particular, there was the Regimental Association sponsored a tour in 2014 where we covered their route from Normandy all the way into northern Germany. Walter did a lot of writing for that to provide some context and information on specific actions and so on. And so I've sort of built off of that and extended that to fill in some additional gaps and sort of carry on the kind of work that he was doing. So my only regret is that I don't have him still around to run any of this information past. I have a couple of ideas that I would love to hear his feedback on. So just a quick outline of what I'm gonna do today. Sort of have a quick look at the German defenses on the Reginas portion of the beach, sort of the plan of how things were going to work in terms of the landings and so on. Quick look at the landings of the supporting arms, artillery, engineers, and so on. Armor, of course, and then the two waves of the Reginas landing that we'll look at, and then the advance inland through Rivière, Fontaine-Henri, and then to the phase lines Elm and Oak, and that sort of takes place over, as we said, a couple of days.
Yep.
Quick bit of context. I didn't find a great map here, but sort of the overall assaults for Neptune.
Yep.
6 infantry divisions landing on the beaches and 3 airborne divisions on the flanks. And you can see where the Juno area, where the Reginas landed, in between the 2 British divisions. And then drilling down a little bit deeper there, a little more detailed view from Stacy. Kind of from west to east there. It's a bit tough to see probably. So the Winnipegs on the left, Reginas next to them. And then they were part of 7th Brigade with the Canadian Scottish, the reserves following up behind them, and supported by the 1st Hussars for armored support for that group. And then farther east, Queen's Own Rifles and the North Shore Regiment doing the initial landings, the Chaudières falling behind them and supported by the Fort Garry Horse. And then finally, 9th Canadian Brigade, the Highland Brigade was the follow-up force and sort of waiting offshore to see where things developed best and to be committed to push farther inland, supported by the Sherwood Fusiliers. I'll also point out here sort of the free phase lines that I mentioned. So the one closest to the beach there, these were named after trees. So that line is called U, which is basically, clear the beach obstacles, clear the villages immediately behind the beach, and get a little toehold. Partway inland, then, sort of halfway down, is line Elm, which is the intermediate objective. And again, it's sort of get a little bit more room to operate, get away from the beaches, provide space for follow-up troops to land and those kinds of things. And then finally at the bottom is line Oak, which is right along the railway. That's the Con Bayou Railway down there. And that was the final objective for D-Day. And to sort of hold those positions and be prepared for the counterattacks. So I'll probably I subscribe to Mark Miller's thesis that was the role of the Canadians
Yep.
to stop that counterattack. You can see down along the Oak line there, you see the river sort of running almost perpendicular to that. That's the Mew River. And that's the line that Mark believes that was the center line of the German counterattack where it was most likely to come. Yep. So that was the job of the Canadians, is to be down there and block that location. Really quickly, next one, just looking at a bit at the defenses. I won't drill down too much on this, but the 736 Regiment was covering most of the area that we see here. So that was, a regiment is the equivalent of our brigade. So 3 battalions covering sort of that entire area from west of Courseulles all the way to the Orne River and across to the big batteries that the British Paras were looking to take out on the east side of the river over there. There's also an Ost battalion, or an East battalion, so a battalion probably of Russians, Ukrainians, and those types of captured Soviet troops who were in the area as well. My estimate, it's difficult to find detailed information, but I think probably 4,000 troops in that regiment, and maybe 400 or 500 in an Ost battalion. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of a force that was sort of spread across the area. That unit had its own artillery and anti-tank elements inland. So some of those circles you see inland where they had their guns and so on. And there were also some elements of 21st Panzer Division, particular anti-tank weapons and so on, sort of scattered across this entire area.
Yep.
So start digging down. This is a look at Courseulles and its small harbor where the Reginas landed. This photo is from 1947, so fairly close to a representation of what the town looked like at the time. On the left or west side of the harbor there is Mike Beach, actually extending all the way across. Yep. Off the picture to the left. That's where the Winnipegs landed, on Mike Red. And then just to the right of the harbor, or to the east, is where the Reginas landed. That was named Nan Beach, and the green sector of the beach where the Reginas landed. The entire area was referred to as Strong Point Courseulles by the Germans, and there were 3 sort of major emplacements here. They called them Widerstandsnests, or we use WN as an abbreviation. Stands for resistance nests, and it's sort of any grouping of defensive positions that are put together and sort of administered and manned by a specific group of people. So WN 29 was in front of the Reginas, right on the beach. There was a WN 30 in the center of Courseulles, and we'll take a closer look at both of those. And then a WN 31 on the Winnipeg side in front of their beach.
Yeah, and be remiss if I didn't mention this is the chunk that is now where the Juno Beach Center is the island, as it's called, on the Winnipeg side.
Okay, so a little closer look at the German defenders. There was one company of one battalion of the regiment that we talked about. So number 6 company, They actually covered all of the Courseulles defenses, so both the Winnipeg and Regina's beaches. So a guess would be 1 platoon on the Winnipeg side and 2 platoons on the Regina side. Very difficult to find much detail on that infantry division these days. So some of the planning documents mention 60 defenders. So again, that idea of maybe about 2 platoons.
Yeah.
We'll see a little bit later, Foster Matheson's account afterwards. He thought there were substantially more than that around. Right. And we can maybe talk a little bit about why that is so. So, maybe 2 platoons, but there are also, gun crews there, heavy weapons, small number of people around, stuff like that. So certainly more. And I certainly wonder if the Ost Battalion, some of the elements of that Ost Battalion were there. I don't think I touch on it later. There's one account that talks about catching or capturing dozens of what they called Italians in a building. So they shot up this building and a bunch of Italians came out. That doesn't make any sense, I don't think. So I can only speculate that these non-German speakers that they didn't recognize may have been these guys from the Ost Battalion.
Which would make sense given the circumstance.
Yeah. And then a little bit of information on sort of some of the weapons and buildings that were there. About a week after D-Day, a special observers party landed. This is part of operational research group, and they were inspecting all of these concrete defenses, and their intent was to see how effective was the offshore naval fire prior to the landings, how effective was it, how many things did it knock out, and so on, and provides a nice sort of itemization of all of the different defenses there that were on the beach. So in the Regina section, there was a large casement containing an 88 millimeter anti-tank gun, big thick walls, 7 to 8 feet thick, a large wall sort of protecting the seaward side of where the gun fired, again 6 or 8 feet thick to protect it from naval fire. That was at one end of the beach. There's at the other end there was a 75 millimeter gun, also in a big heavy casement as well. And then sort of behind those two, a little bit off the beach, there was a 50 millimeter sort of an obsolete anti-tank gun there as well. We'll take a look at that. That was, I think, mostly covering the harbor rather than the beach itself. And then a bunch of different shelters and things like that that were there. A large concrete shelter. I think this was probably the one behind the 75 millimeter gun. Again, very big, thick walls. A Tobruk on the roof, which is sort of a little firing position, a little hole in the roof, basically, where you can pop out, fire a machine gun. Had another machine gun port facing kind of to the east. There was a gas-proof shelter to protect troops in the same area. A significant concrete machine gun emplacement, sort of right in the middle of everything on the beach. A pillbox, probably just for observation, and then a number of Tobruks scattered around, and then a large, heavy wooden shelter with some machine gun positions and sort of covered by about 4 or 5 feet of sand on top of it. So we'll touch on those a little bit. I sort of just mentioned them there, and we can, as we look at a little bit more closely, we can kind of talk about where those things are and how they're involved. So from our side, sort of the very high level, sort of the sequence of the assault. So there's going to be some bombers come over and bomb the beaches first. The effect of that, they were being very careful about not hitting their own troops. So sort of broadly, they went a little too far inland, so did very little damage to the actual beach defenses, more inland that the bombs were landing. There was naval gunfire initially on the coastal defenses, and some of the artillery inland. I think fairly successful, at least in the Regina sector, on the inland artillery. That worked out well. but not a lot of effect on the coastal defenses, as far as we can tell. The observers parties that I mentioned previously sort of concurred with that. Found a few places where, yeah, that looks like a Navy hit, but I'm not sure that was enough to knock out that position, stuff like that. So a bit of an effect, but they were kind of stretching to find damaged concrete and stuff like that to see where naval fire had actually landed.
Yep.
On the way in, on the run in, our artillery and some ships carrying rockets were firing from the landing craft. That had some effects on the town, I think, and on the beach defenses as well. But I won't go into too much detail on that today. And then finally, the actual landings. So first, the idea was the swimming tanks would come in first, then some specialized engineer armor, which is what they call breaching teams, which is basically open up some gaps to allow us to get off the beach and start moving inland. Most of the Reginas sector had about a 10-foot seawall all along. In many places, especially to the east, there was a lot of sand piled up against it, but even there, so it was a 3 or 4 foot wall that they had to figure out how to get through or get over so they could move vehicles and things off the beaches. Mm-hmm. The Royal Marines Artillery Support Group, so that's some mobile artillery, so basically an infantry howitzer mounted on a Cromwell tank, so to provide some initial artillery support that was somewhat mobile. Then the 2 waves of infantry would land, then our artillery, and then some of the vehicles for the infantry, and we'll have a bit of a look at that as we go through the lists. So I've listed out some of the detail of what was dropped in, but I won't go through all of it.
It's a lot.
A lot. I'm just trying to emphasize the complexity and sort of the idea that they thought of all of these things and what they were going to need when they got off the beach. So I'll take a quick run through those. So the plan was 7 minutes before D-Day, the armor would land, or probably 7 minutes before H hour, the armor would land. That was originally planned for 7:15 on as the tide started to rise. Because of sea conditions, that was delayed for about 20 minutes at first, and then another 10 minutes after that. So H hour was about 7:45 in actuality. They were to engage sort of the enemy weapons on the beach, was the idea for the tanks. And then right at H hour behind them would come the AVREs, these Royal Engineer armored vehicles. And you can just see the wide variety of stuff for bulldozers to punch holes in the seawall, and then things to drop logs or bundles of fascines, as they called them, into the anti-tank ditch that they knew that was behind there, and so on. Crabs for clearing the beach of mines, otherwise referred to as flails, and so on. And just something that struck me here was most of those AVREs are specific, obstacle clearance, bridging tools. We all know the AVRE and the giant petard mortar that they have. I don't see any on here. Maybe those 2 at the very bottom that don't have any specific designation. Are those a couple of petards, perhaps? There's no mention of petards on the Reginas beach, which is a little different than many of the beaches.
Yep.
Also at H hour, that armored support that we talked about was going to land. So 8 artillery guns to provide some immediate support was the idea there. Starting to land some engineers with them as well to work with the AVREs to start clearing some obstacles. So again, some of those dozers and things that we saw previously are going to, break through the seawall, but also start trying to push over some of these obstacles and clear some paths for follow-up landing craft to be able to get through. A couple of Sherman Fireflies landing there to provide a little bit more fire support as well. 5 minutes after H hour, the assault infantry was going to land. So you can see basically B company on the the left side, A Company on the right, and supporting troops with them for signals, stretcher bearers, more engineers to help with obstacle clearance and stuff like that. You can see they're landing their FOO parties, forward observation officers, so connected to their artillery as observers and to call in artillery fire. And they're also landing FOBs, forward observers bombardment, same role, but working with the Navy to call in fire from the Navy if needed.
Real quick, Kevin. Interesting point, I think, from Dave. I think it makes sense to me, given the detail you just give. But the Fascine AVREs could have the petard attached to them, which would make sense to me. I think that makes sense.
It doesn't make sense to me as well, I guess,
because that's just how it seems to. Everything that I've read too, and everything I've heard, that would make sense, right?
Yeah. And have something to do once you dropped your load of Fascines.
Exactly, especially because of all the stories I've heard, they're further in, right? So
yeah,
makes sense to me.
And then the second wave of infantry after that, about 15 minutes after the first, was the idea. C and D companies of the Reginas. I did mention, so of the Reginas, 119 troops in those landing craft assaults, and then all of the associated personnel sort of landing and supporting them and so on. Seeing the first men of support companies starting to land here, no vehicles, but sort of getting ashore and figuring out where vehicles are going to go and some of those kinds of things, signals and stuff like that as well. Canadian press relations.
Yeah,
I wonder who that is.
That's very interesting. That's that early.
I did a little digging to see if any war correspondents mentioned landing at Courseulles, and I don't see any obvious. Maybe that's Orville Fisher, the painter. I don't know.
Maybe.
Just an idea.
Yeah, that could be. And then, of course, I'd be remiss again if I missed my Ottawa connection with the heavy machine gunners, the Cameron Highlanders.
Yeah. Yes, and so I was going to mention them. So that's the Camerons. They're medium machine gun and mortar support. They don't have any of their heavy equipment there, I don't think. I think they're doing exit control. So again, sort of policing the exits, getting vehicles through where they should be until their heavier weapons can land. Camerons do, though, definitely an important part of everything that the Reginas did, always closely involved. So I did want to mention them as well. And then really quickly going through the Rangers. So then they land an officer on the Mike Beach. So with the difficulties with the seawall, the idea was only really crucial vehicles landing on the Regina's beach. Most of their vehicles will land on the Winnipeg's beach, easier to get off the beach there, they think. So they have an officer over there to organize that and arrange that. And the command group who's going to come in behind them and land sort of at discretion at a reasonable location and time after the rest of the unit.
Yep.
And then continuing down about 75 minutes after each hour, the intention is for the artillery to land. So 12th Field, they were supporting the Winnipegs. After them, some Regina's vehicles. About the same time, the first vehicles landing on the Regina's beach on the other side. So some mortar, 3-inch mortars, and a couple of anti-tank guns to start supporting the infantry. Keep going down to, that's 12th Field. So keep going ahead, Brad. There's their first vehicle.
Oh, here's the vehicles. Yep. Sorry about that. Yep. Some
support. And then again, next to the 13th Field, this is the regiment supporting the Reginas. And they also landing on the Winnipeg's beach and starting to work to support the infantry.
Yep.
And then is that the last one? I think about a little more than 2 hours later, then sort of the bulk of their vehicles, and you can see that they're landing on Mike Red Beach, which is again the Winnipeg's beach, and starting to move inland hopefully after that.
Yep.
So a photo after that, not much of the Reginas. on the way in. But this is Lieutenant Ray Smith. He's from Charlie Company, platoon commander, and this is him briefing his NCOs aboard the Llangibbey Castle, which was the vessel that carried the Reginas. A couple of those, and these sort of the only ones that are known. Next one after that is a pretty well-known photo of the Winnipeg's landing. But that behind them, that is the Llangibbey Castle, we're fairly sure. And one of the companies of the Regina's, Charlie Company, that we just saw, landed from the Llangibbey Castle at all. But gives you an idea of what the landing ships looked like. Llangibbey Castle was one of the bigger ones. The comments that the other three that carried Reginas were kind of dinky in comparison.
Yeah.
And again, back to our map of Courseulles. So the plan was to decide to divide the town into 12 different blocks that they're going to clear. All the troops had looked at air photos and models and things like that. They knew the town, the layout of the town extremely well, knew exactly where they are. And if you go forward, Brad, I've never located a proper trace of that in Ottawa. So this is sort of a guess as what it might have looked like. Certainly not precise, but a feel that of where they were, and sort of fits with the narrative of how things progressed through the day. So the idea was that Able Company would clear Block 1, the area right along the beach, sort of the heaviest defenses. And then when they were done that, sort of work up the west side of town through 5, 6, and 7. Baker Company would land to the east and clear 2, 3, and 4 initially. Sort of clearing way for Charlie Company, who would follow right behind them and clear 8 through 11, and then sort of see how things were going. At that point, Baker Company might either go to help Able Company if needed, or run up to 12 and sort of complete the clearance of the town, was the idea. Interesting, First Hussars records mention a Block 13, which is not mentioned in any of the Reginas. So my guess is that was some sort of a rally point or something like that. Once the town is clear, where are we going to meet up to get ready to move inland?
Yeah, as far as my research on the First Hussars, because hometown unit for me, and I did that video a year ago now. That's as far as I know is what that was. That is mentioned explicitly, not by that name, but a rally point is mentioned multiple times.
Okay, excellent. And I'm sure, Brad, feel free to fill in with the First Hussars stuff on the basis of your research and your presentation.
Yeah, it may end up happening. I apologize if I go on too much.
No worries. So this is another air photo of a slightly closer look of Courseulles. So it allows us to have a bit of a look at some of the defenses more closely. So you go ahead there, the 2 concrete casements. Go ahead, Brad, and I've circled them.
Yep.
So on the left there, on the west, that's the 88 millimeter caisson firing east across the beach. And the other one is the 75 millimeter casement firing west across the beach. So those are the 2 big ones that they have to deal with. Behind that, if you go on, fill in, there's the anti-tank ditch behind them, sort of drawn in red there, sort of blocking access to the town is the idea. We'll talk about it a bit later. Just in front of the anti-tank ditch, you can see the railway sort of curving into town there, and that fits into a couple of the accounts that we'll talk about later. And an idea of the direction of fire of the 88 millimeter, and sort of its sort of arc of fire that it could provide, and then the 75 millimeter, which I'll talk about this arc of fire a little bit later on, and sort of notice it looks to me like very little on the Regina's beach itself. We're sort of at the farthest extent that it could fire, but I'll let you know why I think that's interesting here in a few slides. So the landings themselves, I've long had the impression that this sort of reflects where the first 2 companies landed. Right. Able Company kind of right in front and right in the middle of everything, and Baker Company a little bit to the east. In the course of this and reading the accounts closely, it's hard. The accounts are kind of ambiguous. It's hard to tell whether that's actually true or not. And if I read them another way, could they be talking about something slightly different? And so I think, if we go to the next one, I think this is slightly more accurate.
Okay.
The Naval Company actually landed a little farther east than that, and B Company as well. And I'll talk a little bit about why I think that's the case as we go through.
Oh, cool.
It does fit a little better with the map references in the operational order, where they say,
okay.
here's our planned landing location. It's a single coordinate where a company will be spread across. It fits a bit better there. I think it fits a little better with Matheson's account that he gives to the historical officer later.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as well. Major Duncan Grosh, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, leading Able Company, and Major Frank Peters, leading Baker Company on the left. And again, sort of if that's the true, then the plan following is for Able Company then to turn right and sort of clear that block 1 from one end to the other. So rather than a frontal clearance of that, does it make sense that they kind of turned right into that area and cleared it from one end to the other? Yeah. And then Baker Company sort of moving behind them into their block 2 and starting to move through the town as well. Mm-hmm. Matheson's account again talks about A as a left flanking attack.
Yep.
On those. So again, that kind of fits a little bit better.
Yep.
As well. And then the follow-up companies, Charlie and Dog.
Sorry about that.
Charlie effectively right behind B. Again, they're going to clear the way. Don't get involved in B Company's fight. Get deeper into the town and do some more clearing. And then Dog Company farther to the east again. Stu Tubb, Major Stu Tubb, is the commander of Charlie Company. And Jack Love is the commander of Dog Company, again, following about 15 minutes behind, according to the plan. So the actual landings, this is an interesting photo that I came across. The DD tanks, the swimming tanks, actually landed about 2 minutes before 8. And I think we see one of them right here. So the 88 millimeter casement there along the harbor, and a DD tank moving up and firing on that position, I believe. As Brad will know, 19 out of the 20 planned to launch did actually do so.
Yep.
And I think 14 of them landed.
Correct. Yep.
And provided very effective support for the Reginas. As we're looking at this one, just sort of note the height of the tide there.
Yeah.
We'll look at some later photos and sort of figure out our timing. Fairly even advance of the tide back there, and a reasonably long distance through the obstacles to get up to that tank, to that casement for the 88. We can't see the 75. It's just off the right edge of this photo, but we can see some tracks there. So probably one of the DD tanks, one or more DD tanks maneuvering to engage that 75 millimeter. Over there, one of the accounts says one of the DDs fired 25 rounds at the 75 millimeter casements before killing it, and the amount of time that took, the tide rose enough to swamp the tank, kill the engine, and it couldn't move from there. So it appears to me that the DDs worked almost exactly to plan here. They got there a few minutes early, knocked out the major emplacements. The plan was for them to land 12 minutes of the infantry. As it turned out, they were 11 minutes ahead. So very effective here. One other little thing I'll mention, next to the 88 millimeter casement and sort of directly in front of that DD tank, you can see sort of a bright sort of inverted L shape there, a right angle out in front of the casement.
We're up here.
Yeah, so go down to the very bottom right picture, Brad. So the casement, and then just to the right of there.
Oh, here.
That white.
Yeah.
So that's a tank obstacle. So there's an exit off the beach there. So a large, heavy tank obstacle.
Right.
It didn't allow tanks to get through. And so we'll sort of fit into how things work out. Again, you can see some of the trenches and things like that behind that casemate and so on. We'll talk about those a bit more later as well. The reports are that I've heard, not sure exactly where it came from, that 88 millimeter only fired 7 rounds after the Navy bombardment. So that's interesting. The observation party that looked like a hit very close to the entrance there. Some splinter damage from the Navy, so maybe disabled that crew for a time. And then by the time they got back in action, that DD tank was coming up again. A bit speculative, but that sort of fits a little bit. The 75 millimeter, on the other hand, there were about 200 empties in that casement when they came and looked. And so my question is sort of, who were they firing at? Again, very little Regina's activity on that beach. So is it possible that was firing across the harbor and at the Winnipegs? And I think that's quite possible. Multiple Winnipegs talk about 75 millimeter fire coming from the far left end of their beach, and there's no 75 millimeter there. So are they talking about our 75 firing across the harbor there?
That was always, sorry, just jump in there real quick. That was always my assumption based on how I was reading it, because that's one of the things I dug into was the range and the accounts for that 75. And that's the best I could come up with. But again, well, we'll get to it. But there's the 50 as well, but that's a different story. But that's as far as I can tell, I think that's the best guess, right? Is that's what happened. Again, I'm sorry, just real quick here. I have another question. That's a good one. I haven't found an answer for this. How many the first Hussars actually got off the beach? I couldn't find an answer.
It's hard. I've heard 2 swamped and 1 knocked out by fire, but
I've heard
say definitively.
Yeah, I couldn't find a detailed account either, because again, there's a few that swamp. Again, that's unclear of what actually happens. But yeah, it's a good number, definitely better than some of the other beaches, particularly the ones more known, right? Like the American beaches, it's definitely a lot more.
And I think we'll mention later. The Reginas talk about 10 tanks in support as they move inland later on in the day. So again, that sort of fits with 3 or 4 that didn't get off the beach.
Yeah.
Again, trying to move along here. So the initial landings by Able and Baker Company. Able is at 8:09. So again, 11 minutes after the DDs or so. Baker Company a few minutes behind them. The reports are there's very sporadic fire on the run in, very little happening until they touch down and drop the ramps, and then the machine gun fire goes wild from there. It's immediately going badly for Able Company. They have a hard time getting off the beach. 6 Field Company of the Royal Canadian Engineers was with them again for obstacle clearance. Also took terrible casualties. The tide is a little higher than planned here. Almost an hour from the original plan. Very difficult to clear obstacles. They're trying to do what they can, and under terrible fire trying to do that. Things are a little bit better for D Company, a little bit farther away from the main defenses of the beaches. So dance ahead a little bit. Baker Company makes good progress through Block 2 and into Block 3 by the time Charlie Company lands, about 8:35. Able Company still held up by heavy fire, not making much progress. And then go ahead and we can take a look sort of at what I think is a closer look at the situation on the beach at about that time, a little after 8:30. So these are a couple of photos that I think I had seen snippets of these photos before, but never connected them to Courseulles exactly or where on Courseulles. Stephen Fisher, if you don't follow him on Twitter, Sea Spitfires, excellent. He's an archaeologist and with an interest in sort of the landing craft, landing ships, all the planning and organization of that. And did a really nice thread on this, sort of interpreting what he thinks is going on here. So this is, again, Nan Green Beach on the morning of June 6th. and these two sort of sequential photos taken by photo reconnaissance, showing sort of the extent of the Reginas Beach there. And so I'm interested to look at some more details on there and see what they tell us. Sort of work our way west to east across these photos and take a closer look. So the first zoom in there sort of concentrates on the area of the 88 millimeter. So right at the very left edge there. And the harbor mouth behind it there, extending out to sea. Note the state of the tide here. I think this is obviously the tide's much higher in, and not quite the same kind of tide line that we saw before. So definitely later than about 8 o'clock when that first tank landed.
Yep.
A pair of tanks swimming in there on the right side. Not sure of that other one. Maybe a vessel of some kind. I see a little wake behind there, so pulling away perhaps. And the big thing to notice here, sort of between the 88 casement and that groin, sort of extending out to the sea there, sort of the pile of rocks to prevent erosion and stuff like that. I don't see much of anything happening on that beach. There are no vehicles, no obvious signs of men on that beach. So again, sort of leads to my idea that maybe that A company did not land right in front of everything, and we're a little bit farther east. And if we go to the next one, a little bit more support for that idea. Again, there's the groin on the left that we saw, and then another one on the far right-hand side there. Behind that first groin, there are men behind there. So I think that's Able Company behind that groin. And if you extend the line up there, right up to the top of the beach and into those first buildings there, it looks to me like there are men up there sort of getting off the beach and not to the railway track. So on the north side of the railway still, but in there, in that sort of area, it looks to me like there might be some men moving around up there. Yeah. And to the right of the groin, I think I see A Company casualties on that beach. So the machine gun fire right at the edge of the water, mortar fire along there, that fits with A Company casualties to my eye. Behind the beach, we can, or sort of right in the middle there, we can see the 75 millimeter casement. That is obviously looks like it's been cleared already by now.
I sure hope so.
Sort of along the line at the top of the railway at the very right edge, along from the 75, I can see a tow brook, a round hole right
here.
Yeah, and then go farther to the right. Right to the top of that groin. Yeah, so that's a tow brook there. That's a larger one, so potentially maybe one that was firing mortars, machine guns.
That's my guess.
Yeah. And it's hard to see here. There is one just a little bit to the left of that as well. Maybe more of a machine gun tow brook.
Yeah.
Some armor starting to move inland. To me, those look like flail tanks or crabs right beside the 75 millimeter casement. A little longer than the other tanks. So that makes me think there's a flail out in front of that. And it looks like they've flailed a clear path across the beach there to allow other vehicles to follow up and move behind them. Tough to tell if those other vehicles are other AVREs or DD tanks starting to move inland there.
Yeah, it could be both. I read it. Sorry, just again, quick reel. I read the accounts that they had to wait. The DDs, they were getting the supporting fire like you discussed, and then they had to wait for this literally to happen. So they were kind of just in support as best they could.
Yep. So let's see. And then down the anti-tank ditch across the bottom again, but down the bottom right, again, that looks like another flail to me that has cleared a straight line path back to the anti-tank ditch across that bit of field and is preparing for another AVRE to go to work on that anti-tank ditch to build some kind of crossing and so on.
Yeah.
It appears everything sort of stayed in this line. Sort of they didn't want to stray any farther east than that. The ground to the east there were indications that it might be mined, so they wanted to avoid it. Potentially soft ground. So it's interesting that they kind of tended to go through the town rather than to go around the town with the armor, and that's kind of the reasoning for that. So we can see some trenches and things like that. A couple of the shelters, they're hard to make out there, but a couple of the large concrete shelters back there, which appear to me they must be clear by now. And then at the anti-tank ditch, Brad, about the middle bottom, that looks like men crossing the anti-tank ditch to me.
Yeah.
So they carried ladders to help them get over the seawall and over the anti-tank ditch, and that looks like that's what's going on to me right there.
Yep, would make perfect sense.
Okay. Maybe just back to the ABREs quickly. They landed a bit late, about 15 minutes later than planned. So again, didn't have much time to work on obstacles clearance. I think so. This is the first group of ABREs who've made their way down the beach. They landed a little farther east than expected. So again, the flails out in front, and I think other ABREs for bridging and so on moving in behind them, and the dozers and things like that coming up behind them. And we go to the next one again, a little farther to the east, more vehicles in that sort of next section. I think those are DD tanks. You can see skirts on some of them and so on. So as Brad said, waiting for a clear path to move inland. Okay. Looks like at this point, we're through the seawall at least one point, and the DD's waiting to move up there. Along the top of the beach to the east, we can see troops marching. So there's troops that have landed there and are moving towards the town. And then continue east again with the next one. See that line? That looks like a company to me, extending all the way across there and moving along.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think this is the second group of ABREs. Again, another 15 minutes late and a little farther east than they should. So is that second batch of ABREs landing here and going to move across to support the other ones as well. The Centaurs were also, the artillery support was also slightly late. So maybe they are mixed in here as well and just getting ashore about this time, again, around 8:30 or so. So to sort of wrap that all up, with the next one, back to our original pair of air photos, Stephen Fisher thinks this is about 8:20 based on, again, looking at the sequence of landings. There are differences of timings when different people say different groups landed and so on. I think maybe just a bit later than that, maybe after 8:35. As we saw, the 75 millimeter is clear. So Baker Company has been ashore for a while. 8:15 was only 8:20 would only be a few minutes after they landed. So 8:35 has given them 20 minutes to clear those locations. A Company is definitely ashore. But again, we saw a few of them in those first block of buildings. And my theory would say B Company is already well off the beach and they're into town and we can't see them because they're mixed in with the buildings. The photo quality is not that great. I think Charlie Company has just landed, and that's at 8:35, and that's them marching across the top of the beach. So they're moving in to follow behind Charlie Company. And Dog Company, we don't see here. Sort of the one thing I can't figure out, and maybe I would like to talk to Stephen about, Dog Company hasn't landed yet. They're probably to the east of this, but there's no sign of a group of landing craft assault coming in behind there. So that's the only sort of hiccup. Where is Dog Company? Why can't I see them? Is sort of the only wrinkle in my theory.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I just have a quick question. I don't know if you have that info right here because I've seen these photos myself, and they come from U.S. Archive. Is the unit of the that actually took the reconnaissance photos?
I don't know for sure. I probably could pull it out of those photos, but it's definitely American Photo Reconnaissance. Taking most of these photos.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but it's a P-38, which from the Great Dominion story, and that would make sense given the timing. That was my best guess as well. I don't remember exactly because I have it all saved. I just don't have it with me right now. Yeah,
the same. I definitely saw it. It's an American squadron. I just don't remember the number.
Yeah, I don't either.
Off the top of my head. Moving ahead, almost the identical time, but the view is slightly different. So is this a second camera in the same plane? Is this another plane following closely behind? Is interesting. Very quick sort of look at a couple of things on that photo. that shows a little bit more clearly. If we move ahead to some blow-ups, again, there's the 88 on the left-hand side there. You can see the anti-tank wall still, or the anti-tank obstacle just in front of it, sort of the L shape. There, yeah. And a circular position sort of at the top of the beach there on the right-hand side. Again, sort of curious what kind of position that is, but that certainly looks like a position to me.
Yep.
Right along the seawall.
Me too.
A couple of others. Go to the next one. Again, this is moving east. See the same scene around the 75 millimeter. Right at the top of that groin on the left-hand side, sort of a U-shaped structure up above that, about higher on the beach.
Oh yeah, right here.
So again, what is that? Is that a fighting position of some kind there, which I found interesting as well.
Yep.
So talk just briefly here about the tanks. So many Regina Rifles accounts say there was no tank support. Our tanks didn't show up.
Yep.
And to me, as a layman, the tanks, it looks to me like the tanks worked perfectly, but the tanks all left after they did their first job. And if you think about that first tank that we saw landing there, by the time the tide's in, he's sitting on, maybe a couple of football fields of area. And that's not a ton of room to maneuver around and defend yourself or accomplish very much. They know the exits are always going to be at the east end of the beach, so everybody heads that way. And that's why the Reginas don't see them as they start to get into their clearance of the town.
Yep.
So we'll follow the progress inland as we go along. Dog Company lands sort of east of that location there, a little bit off the photo. They're even later, about 8:55. The tide is well in by this time, covering the obstacles. So they have 2 landing craft destroyed by mines and 1 landing craft that gets hung up on an obstacle and sort of tears the bottom out of it as they try to maneuver and get out of there. And the men spend the rest of the day moving between boats, trying to find a way to get ashore on an undamaged landing craft. But they're not part of the initial fight. So that obstacle kills the commander of Dog Company, Jack Love. His company sergeant major, Danny Yo, is in the same boat. And the battalion signals officer, Bob Murchison, is in there as well. All are killed. I suspect it also killed the Foo from 13th Field. I suspect he was with them as well, or in one of those 2 boats. But Mark Milner talks about that. Captain Dirks, I suspect that's where he was killed as well. Baker and Charlie are continuing to make some progress into the town, and they get down to, it's difficult to see here. I should have done a little bit more orientation. The town square is just sort of ahead of Charlie Company. Maybe I'll point it out here. Sort of their first 2 men into the town square are killed by machine gun fire. And as they sort of bump into the edge of that other Widerstands nest in the middle of town, and which we'll take a little bit closer look at. So they call down some centaur fire via their Foo, and knocks out that machine gun position, and they're able to continue moving ahead. Go to some more air photo fun. I love these. I can look at these for hours and try to pick out details and figure out what's going on and stuff like that.
I have stared at them for hours. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. This looks to me like later again. Again, it looks like the tide is all the way in at this point. And just we can see a little bit more of the positions behind that 88 casement, and a little sharper photo of the actual casement itself there. And if we zoom into those, to the next one, the positions behind there. So again, the trenches, the large circle along the harbor. So that's the 50 millimeter position back there. Again, I don't think that has much line of sight to the Reginas beach. I don't think that's terribly involved with the Reginas necessarily. That's covering the harbor, is my belief. And then farther up the beach, very hard to see at the top of that Y-shaped trench. I see a very small Tobruk opening at the top of that Y, the left bar of the Y there. Is that a little dot up there right along the harbor? And then potentially another, and actually maybe I can see them better on the next one, Brad. Again, top of the Y, right along the harbor. There's a little black circle inside a white circle. Yeah, a little farther up from there.
Here. Oh, here. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one at the right at the point at the very top there, a small Tobruk at the top there as well. Yep. So a machine gun kind of position there as well.
Yep.
And then we'll go some additional photos of the aftermath, but a way to talk about some of the fighting on the beach, particularly for Able Company. These are photos by Robert Baer, who was a Marine Corps officer on the planning staff for Neptune, and he wangled a way to land at Courseulles and on Nan Green later in the day, and took these photos, some of which I've seen as we've gone through, but a couple that are new to me. So these are the beachfront buildings looking to the west. So this is what A Company was looking at and working its way through. Above, this is later in the day, but above that stacked material on the beach there, is that a pillbox or a bunker just above that, right along the seawall, above that stacked material? And below the large shell hole in the side of that one building. So we'll zoom in, Brad, and see what you think as we zoom in on that guy. So that looks a lot like a pillbox to me. Yeah. So one of the ones they were probably talking about. Looks like it's taken some shell fire nearby. Yep. All the spang fans. We have some serious spang here.
Oh, a lot of spang there. Oh, yeah.
Yep. And then it's very hard to see here, but sort of at the right edge of the photo, there's a concrete pole sort of beyond the building, sort of the last vertical line there. Looks to me like a vertical, lamppost or something like that. So if we go to our next photo, I think this is the same location looking the other direction. Right. There's the concrete pole and that potential bunker right in front of us. The 75 millimeter casement back beyond that, farther down the beach. And if we zoom in a little closer on that one, unfortunately, there's a bad fingerprint right where we'd like to look there, but that looks like the opening to a pillbox to me. So one of the positions potentially that that Able Company had to clear on the beach. So let's move along. Sort of that view to the west, somewhere on this beach, was Captain Jim Else, who was the FOO from 13th Field Artillery, attached to Able Company. Somewhere on this beach, he was wounded twice, I think in the hand initially, and then later wounded in the head. His assistant was killed at some point in time. Continued to work with his company, continued to provide fire supports as the A Company was working. Fainted twice along the way due to loss of blood, and was finally evacuated late in the day. He was recommended for a military cross for that support. The Reginas make specific mention of that support and the value of it, but he was turned down for that award. His signaler, Gunner Holtzman, is also known. Once Else was evacuated, his signaler carried on with the job and calling in fire, and he was awarded a military medal as a result of that. Next one, a little closer look at the 75 millimeter casing. And again, those are Block 1 buildings that we can see in the distance there. You see that it's disguised to look as a house. As a house, yep. So sort of a fake roof on top, some fake windows painted on the side. Yeah. The Reginas weren't fooled. I think photo reconnaissance probably figured out what that was before they got the camouflage on. So there was no surprise there when they got there. And then another look at the firing end, the business end of that casement in the next one, and you can see sort of the aperture designed for actually an artillery gun, but they sort of hung some wood over that to narrow the aperture, make it a little bit smaller. Firing with an anti-tank gun.
Sorry, just a quick question from Scott here. Is there any interpretation reports for these photographs? For the USMC ones, I know for the aerial ones, I couldn't find one.
No, I've never encountered that, but photo research is honestly new to me, so it's possible, but I've never heard or seen anything like that.
Yeah. Not surprised.
So this is extending out, Brad, as we feared with all these slides. So we'll sort of keep moving along and talk a bit about more about A Company. So again, back to our looking to the west, very similar to location to where we were before. Some of the buildings on our left-hand side, 88 millimeter casing directly ahead of us. Sort of notice the thick wall on the seaward side there to protect it from naval fire. And so I'm guessing we're halfway along the beach, or halfway along block 1 here that A Company has to clear, halfway to that large casement, which is sort of the last thing that they will need to clear out. Note all the wire and stuff like that on the beach, the amount of wire that they had to work through and work with. So not very long after the landing, Able Company had its senior officers were not available. Their commander, Duncan Grosh, took a few steps off the landing craft and was shot through the knee. So he was unable to assist. Their second in command, Ron Shawcross, was his job was to land on the left side and work east down the beach and try to liaise with the tanks, get some tank support and bring it up. He had a terrible time with that. I won't go through the story in detail. It's available out there, but had a hard time getting the tanks to pay attention to them and follow him to assist his company. So probably took him at least an hour to try to arrange some tank support and get back to his company. So in the meantime, the rest of A Company has to get to work. So on the beach, I guess deciding at some point that just convening here is not sufficient. Convening is not enough, so we have to get to work. And these small groups start to form up, and then sort of under their own initiative and independently start to work to clear some stuff here. So somewhere along this beach, Corporal Ted Heinrich, section commander, he has 2 men with him. Jumps up, charges a machine gun position. He gets wounded by machine gun fire, pulls back and gets patched up, but does a little damage as he's doing that. A rifleman, Oscar Johnson, with an unknown number of men, a very small number of guys. He crawled a long stretch of this beach under heavy machine gun fire, cut his way through 6 feet of wire, went back, got those men together to rush that gap, clear the trenches behind it, and allowing some others in the company to sort of move up and occupy those positions. It was noted that he'd never had any sort of leadership position in his section or anything like that, but it was him who sort of took charge and got things moving in his little bit of the beach. Next one, couple more fellows. Sergeant Jack Snyder, top photo there on the right. He was a platoon commander. Able Company landed 1 lieutenant short. So he was commanding a platoon, had about 8 men with him, maybe a third of his expected platoon. They were able to get up over the seal wall, clear several positions while under heavy mortar fire. The second fellow on that photo is Sergeant Walter Armstrong. He was a platoon sergeant, had 2 men with him. Getting up off the beach, he'd been shot through one leg and grazing his second leg. He picked up a Bren, cleared a machine gun post on the beach, and then sort of located another machine gun, pointed it out to other groups, and provided suppressing fire on that while other people worked to clear that one. And another corporal, Roy Bartley, he passed through Armstrong's position into the houses. Sounds like he was firing his Bren from the hip as he moved through there, and his Bren jammed. So he lay down in this open area, and stripped and cleared the blockage in his gun, got up, started firing, and continued to move forward. And then the last 2, back to sort of our first photo, I think probably a bit later in the morning, sort of as they were nearly finished clearing block 1, Lieutenant Bill Grayson is sort of the well-known story for the Reginas. he got up close to the 88 millimeter position. There was a machine gun covering the gap between him and the 88. The machine gun was firing sort of timed bursts to cover that area. So he figured out, okay, if he stops firing, I got time to run up to the casement and take it on. So he put that into effect. The machine gun stopped. He dashed toward the gun with a grenade in one hand and his pistol in the other hand, and got hung up in the wire around that machine gun position. For whatever reason, the next burst didn't happen, so he was still in the game. Sort of tore himself free. Did get up to the side of that casement, tossed his grenade in. It went off, dived in that large aperture there behind it, and saw the last of that gun crew exiting towards the rear. So charged after them. Grenade came flying out towards him. Sort of calmly picked it up and threw it back. Followed through some of those trenches behind that position and came to a shelter down there. And he sort of peeked around the corner. It looked like 3 or 4 guys in there, called for them to come out. And 35 men came out of that shelter, surrendered to him. And so he sent them back along the beach as prisoners. And then last one I'll mention, Lieutenant Dutch Heisler, the other platoon commander. So Grayson and Heisler were the other two platoon commanders. He had got up off the beach and got along the railway track and moved to the far end of the railroad track to the station there. It was firing sort of across the beach. He cleared out a position there and stopped the firing from that flank. So I think that was assisting Grayson in his charge towards the bunker. Another machine gun that could potentially get him. And sorry, one more. The company sergeant major, Bruce Mcconnell. Again, an unknown number of men with him. He'd been wounded by gunfire on the beach, later wounded again by mortar fire. And he organized the 2-inch mortar team that was there to drop smoke around this 88 emplacement. And again, I think that's what assisted Grayson in getting close. And that's why that machine gun was firing time bursts, because of all the smoke. They couldn't see anything specifically. And so assisting Grayson with his charge. And he took over the control of Grayson's prisoners once they were sent back down the beach as well.
Right.
So those 8 men that I think I mentioned there, 1 military cross, 2 military medals, and 2 mentions and dispatches for their actions on Baker Company or on Adel Company's beach. And sort of one of the things, Walter, again, those accounts are sprinkled around in different places, and sort of my friend Walter Keith wanted to sort of pull those together and make sure that those things were better known and better understood, the actions there. So again, back to the 88 casement. So again, put on your speculation hat briefly. So the 88 casement at the top, between the buildings, is that an alley running, sort of pointing towards that, sort of running mostly south, yeah, slightly to the east. So Grayson mentioned running across an alley, across an open area covered by a machine gun, and over to the casement. And I didn't point out before, it's really hard to see here, Brad, but in that open area, sort of along the seawall, kind of where it curves towards the 88 casement there's a black dot. Yeah. I was going to look at that on, again, is that the machine gun position sort of covering that gap back there?
Right.
Again, a speculation. And that's the one that was smoked off to provide Grayson an opportunity. And then just off, sort of, if you extend down that alley towards the south, you can see where the railway tracks are extending there and sort of end at the train station just off our photo. And so that's where Heisler cleared that position. And again, that would be the flanking fire that was that Grayson was had to get rid of before he could make his move to the casement. Okay, we're going to get moving here, Brad. So Photo of some of the officers that I was going to identify. Again, if you're interested in any of specifically of any of those, the men that we've talked about, the officers in particular, let me know. I can find you some photos. As we see, officer photos are relatively easy to find, or more easy to find, especially the D-Day guys. Very hard to find photos of many of the enlisted men.
Yeah.
So keep moving. A couple of modern photos. This is from the edge of the harbor, looking back. The 50mm gun that's there as a monument now. That was along the beach. The DD tank Bold there. One of the Baker Squadron tanks that floundered on the way in and was pulled out of the ocean and mounted there. And then just under the barrel of the gun is the building that it was the train station back at the time. It's a cinema now. So that was there at the time, and sort of the front part of the hotel to the left there was there as well. And so again, if that alleyway that we talked about sort of ran right in front of there, so that position, the 88mm casement is to our left, and the beach, the ocean is to our left there as well. So sort of the area that we were talking about in a modern context. And then the next one is a look at the 88 casement was obviously cleared away. That's the bar that's on the beach now, restaurant, affectionately known as Grayson's Pub by the regiment. And so that is built on the foundations of that casement that was there. Okay, let's go through the action a bit more quickly here, Brad.
Yeah.
About 10 o'clock, A Company is still fighting. Everybody else is making decent progress. HQ Company has come ashore and moved a bit inland. Dog Company is ready to move inland towards their first objective, which is Riviere. And I'm not entirely sure where they are. Again, they're supposed to avoid the fight here. Their objective is Riviere. Charlie Company is moving south of the square, which we can look at here. So this is, again, the middle of town. See that next one, Brad, sort of another air photo of the sort of oval shaped set of streets there. At the top. And then right below that, the light colored area, that's the square. That's the town square. The long, narrow building on that square is the mayor, the town hall there as well. And two roads leading away from that. So at the southeast corner of the square, there's a road leading towards the south. And then another one that sort of loops around to the left-hand side, past the cemetery over there on the far left, and head south as well. And in that sort of orchard, in that area where that road loops down there, you can see some trenches down there and stuff. So that's that third resistance nest down there. So I think some wire and machine guns, maybe a mortar or two, something like that, sort of protecting those two roads, I think is the idea. Sort of provide an obstacle to anybody using the two major roads heading south that we're going to that they're going to use. And so this is, again, pretty well-known photos. This is that road leading south from the square. So a DD tank entering that square. The legend is that's Leo Garapi's tank pulling into that street.
That's the legend, yes.
That's the legend, yeah. And then the other one is Regina Rifles, I think, with that tank or another tank, that unit, again, heading down that same road as well.
Yeah, it's always going to be said to be Garapi because, well, I've gone into the history with him before, but it's hard to, it's impossible to prove, but yes.
The uncropped version of that right-hand photo shows the church, so you can be sure which street you're on. Yeah. So the church is ahead of them down the way. They don't have much trouble along there. A little bit of fire from the steeple of the church and a few other stragglers, but they make fairly quick progress down there. And then that modern view, again, that first tank pulling in there is about where that motorcycle is. And the second photo is a little farther along that street towards the church, which we can see in the distance there, the steeple. Okay, again, sort of little updates. A Company is around 10:30. A Company is making better progress. Baker and Charlie have effectively cleared the town, or just finishing clearing the rest of the town. A Company gets an order not long after this. Okay, we've cleared that block 1 finally, so move into the rest of your blocks. That's probably why Baker Company doesn't go to help. Seems like they've got it beat at this point. So Baker moves on, and again, Dog is starting to move towards Riviere. They meet up with Charlie Company here not too long after, and they head that way together. Not long after that, they get a report that A Company is taking fire from block 1 again. So this area that they had cleared, Germans had managed to sort of get through some of those trenches and tunnels, infiltrate back in there. So they start the whole job of clearing part of that area again. Bill Grayson leads that again, and they finally do accomplish that, but it takes another bunch of hard fighting. They send an additional troop of tanks to go assist them this time, and they do it again. Okay. So let's get inland, Brand, sort of a map of the area a little bit south of Courseulles there. So right in the middle, the little harbor, and sort of middle bottom of the map, the village of Riviere. They took, I think, the minor road close to the river there, not that sort of main one you see heading towards Benny-sur-Mer. So that was their route. And the objective there are 3 bridges in that area. There's 2 small bridges right in the village itself, and then west of the village, there's a substantial bridge over the larger River Seulles out to the west, and that's a critical objective for the Reginas. Their orders are to hold that to the last man. That links up with the Winnipegs, links up with 50th British Division farther to the west, so it's seen as a critical link to pulling things together within the beachhead and providing them some room to maneuver and so on.
Yep.
Again, some modern air photos next. That is Riviere, sort of down to the bottom. So Dog Company gets into Riviere, clears that fairly quickly. Charlie Company goes out to the east, or sort of the west, to the main bridge, and reports that clear. They capture sort of 12 to 20 prisoners in there. Looks like there's a headquarters of some kind, probably from that Ost battalion.
Right.
I think at this point.
Yeah.
A Company again has now finished with block 1 and are finally starting to move inland with the rest of the unit. And then that small one, sorry, go back one, Brad. A small photo down the bottom left, so you can see at the very left edge of that small one, that's the bridge to the west of the town there. And you can see that's actually a double bridge. So sometime after that, Royal Engineers added a second bridge there. And so if you go there today, you can see the piers for that bridge are still there. So I assume sort of beefing up their transportation infrastructure later on in the campaign, and a lot more traffic sort of passing through that area is the reasoning for that.
Yep.
And another interesting one there to the east of Riviere, you can see the beginnings of Benny-sur-Mer Canadian Cemetery there. So the first burials at Benny-sur-Mer there. Again, this is from 1947, this photo. And so that's where Benny is in relation to everything else. So everybody gets to Riviere by about 1500 hours, and they're resting and sort of waiting on the order to advance from there. Next photo is Fontaine-Henri, the next village south. So in the photo, Fontaine-Henri right in the sort of middle of the photo, Benny-sur-Mer, the village to the north, and Basley, I believe it is, on the right edge of the photo. So that's their next objective. They're probably 2.5 miles inland at this point, and so trying to continue push on. That starts at about 1700 hours. Baker Company is going to go into Fontaine-Henri. Charlie Company is going to sort of skirt around it and continuing heading farther south from there.
Mm-hmm.
About that time, as they get started, the numbers vary, whether it's 2 tanks or I've heard 6 tanks knocked out by an 88. First is ours. Again, this is the 10 tanks in support at this point, and several of them certainly knocked out from the direction of Ambly, which is sort of to the left of the C and B markers there off the screen, and sort of on a little higher ground, and knocks them out there. There's some artillery fire on Charlie Company at the same time. They move down into the river valley there to get out of observation and avoid that. So little progress along the way here, but making good good progress. Did I say a little progress? Good progress, a little resistance, but mostly stragglers and things like that they're running into at this point in time. They've got some support in place right now. The 3-inch mortars, some of the 3-inch mortars are at Rivière and are providing fire support. The Centaurs are still providing some support. About 7 o'clock, B Company has cleared what little they find in Fontaine-Henri. Charlie Company has reached their objective, La Fresne-Camille, I think it's pronounced, a little farther to the southeast. Charlie Company encounters a pair of 88 guns along that way there. They capture those. And brigade, or the battalion, can report to brigade that objective Elm, the intermediate objective, has been reached.
Yeah.
And the rest of the battalion's moving up to join them. About 2100 hours, a couple hours after that, they're told to dig in for the night. A bit more about Fontaine-Henri while we're here. This is a modern view of the church at Fontaine-Henri.
Sorry, do you want to move forward here?
Yeah, one more.
There we go.
Shortly, yeah. So they were ordered to dig in about 2100 on their positions. About 15 minutes after that comes a report that Baker Company has been overrun. They're all gone. Yeah. Matheson finds that a little hard to believe, so makes a couple of tries to send a dispatch rider, get the real story. Finally does that, not overrun, but somewhere in this area that we see here, there was an artillery strike that basically caught the entire command group of Baker Company. So Frank Peters, the commander, and his second in command, Glenn Dicken, were killed here. One of their platoon commanders, Herb Ziffel, and the company sergeant major Bob Woolman were wounded here. And I think their foo was a casualty here as well. Again, Baker Company lost their foo at some point. In all likelihood, this is where it happens. So it's a hard blow. They'd had a very successful day, not a lot of casualties along the way to have this happen to them. It's one I'm interested in. It's kind of an odd incident, this sort of random artillery strike.
Completely random, yeah.
This is down in a little valley. It's very hard for anybody to see down here and call in artillery. There's been a story that there was an observer in that church tower that called it in. But why is he here? All he can see from here is the town. He can't see anything around it. So it's very strange. So one of my research partners with Reginas, Dolores Hatch, her uncle was Glenn Dicken, who was killed here. She's received some materials from some French locals in the village from the period that shed a little bit more light on where this happened, and we're sort of hopeful that we can figure out things a little bit more. But a place I'd very much love to go stand on this ground and again look at the lines of sight and try to figure out or see if I can get a little closer to understanding how or why this exactly happened here. So something will continue.
Sorry, just real quick as a moment of levity, because that's a completely random but terrible event, is apparently the AI of Google Street View has thought that the fire hydrant has a face and has censored it.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry, I just wanted to point that out. I think that's quite funny.
Okay, so next one's a little summation, D-Day casualties. This differs slightly from the official casualty list, I think. Yeah. I found some anomalies in the research and so on, but I think 45 killed and 3 died of wounds, and a total of 69 wounded in the day. Yeah. So 117 casualties. Again, primarily, of course, in the rifle companies. So effectively a full rifle company over the course of the day, and some substantial casualties in terms of leadership for the rifle platoons. Yeah. So 3 company commanders and a 2 IC, a couple of platoon commanders, 3 of 4 company sergeant majors, and the signals officer. They state about 150 prisoners for the day. Matheson estimated about 100 of those in Courseulles. Yep. So closing in on the end here, so D+1, actually, or just before D+1. So this is sort of the overall picture at around, again, that 2100, get the order to dig in. Yep. 7 Brigade on the left is in good shape. The Winnipegs, roughly their position. Canadian Scottish, very close to the Reginas out there. They're in good shape. And sort of a mix of 8 and 9 brigade units. I think those are correct location. On their right, things are going well there. Mm-hmm. But to the east of 8th Brigade, 3rd British Division has had some trouble.
Yep.
A lot of congestion on the beach and so on. The Hillman and Morris complexes holding them up, other things holding them up as well. So they've been unable to keep up on that flank. On the other flank, on the west side, 50th Division is in pretty good contact with the Winnipeg, so things are okay there. But sort of the analysis seemed to think little concern about that open flank, so let's stop here for the night and carry on in the morning. It's sort of the idea. Again, makes some sense to me.
Yeah.
And I did mention 21st Panzer. There was also a counterattack against 3rd British Division over there as well that night. Almost got to the sea, and again put a bit of nervousness into the commander, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So by morning, Able Company has finally rejoined the unit. They picked up about 100 reinforcements along the way, and they catch up to them before the morning, before they set off. So I think that's when my uncle joined the unit. So he was landed as a reinforcement late on the day, and probably was in that big draft that joined up with the Reginas in the morning.
Yep.
And some stragglers from Dog Company have also appeared through the night, again rescued from damaged boats and sinking boats and stuff like that. They're in pretty rough shape when they get ashore. They're soaking wet. They have no equipment, but they bring them forward, get them re-equipped, mostly with enemy weapons. They have nothing, so they use enemy weapons to re-equip them.
Yep.
And then the advance to the final objective, the Oak Line. And so a bit confusing, some of the accounts sometimes. So just showing the specific routes that they took. So Charlie, followed by Able Company, is going to go down the highway or down the road to Bretteville, Norrey-en-Bessin. You can see down there on the highway, and then just south of that is the railway, which is sort of the big objective for there. And Baker, followed by Dog, sort of following a different route up the Mew Valley, and clearing those towns as well. And again, not occupying any of those. Their objective is the railroad.
Yep.
Very little resistance on the Charlie Company side of things. They get very quickly make their way through. They started about 7:15. See no resistance before noon. They're approaching Bretteville. I think it's about 11 o'clock. I think I have it on the next slide. Baker and Dog Company do have some fighting, some heavy fighting at times on their road up there. Again, a lot of stragglers sort of down in that valley trying to get away. And again, odd elements Mark Meldner is talking about. There's all kinds of stuff wandering around over on that side of the battlefield.
Oh, yeah.
On the right here, sorry, just really quickly back. On the right, as we're making that advance, back one, Brad.
Oh, sorry.
The Winnipegs are advancing. Okay, on the right, they're headed for Puto, which is also on the railway. So that's their objective. Things are going well there. And on the left, 9 Brigade is advancing sort of on that highway, Villon-le-Buisson, Buron, OT, and all the way to the railway and into Carpiquet is the objective for them.
Which does not go well.
Which, yes, we know how that turned out. So a bit later in the day, Charlie Company is in Bretteville, about 10:30 actually.
Sorry, do you want to go forward? Do you want to go forward? Or
yeah, sorry, the more detailed one now.
Yeah, here we go.
Just a couple left. So Bretteville by 10:30, on the move to Norrey by about 11:15. And they're, maybe 45 minutes later or so, both are free of the enemy.
Yep.
And so the battalion reports the objective line Oak at about 12:15. Baker and Dog Company continue to move to their positions, again, through the Mew Valley. Dog Company over on the sort of rail and road crossing. The road crosses under the bridge, the railway there. Dog Company there. And Baker Company sort of south of the railway. In the area, sort of in between the other two companies. Everybody's dug in by about 5 o'clock in the evening. First counterattacks on those positions. That leads into Sean Clacton's presentation that he did here a couple months ago on the bridgehead battles. The first counterattacks that he talked about happened that night. and they happen against all three of those companies, Charlie, Baker, and Dog Company. And they're beaten off fairly effectively there. And one other comment, sometimes you hear the idea that Charlie Company down south there in Norrey-en-Bessin, and that this was some kind of, bit of a lark maybe by Stu Tubb, the commander of C Company, and Foster Matheson. Let's keep going. Maybe let's be aggressive and move down there. I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah.
This ground had been identified in the 7 Brigade op order. This is the crucial ground. Bretteville, Norrey, La Villeneuve. Those are the 3 important places for the Reginas. And so Stu Tubb knew where he was going, I think, before he ever set foot on a ship. But something that pops up at times. Yeah. And again, those battles and so on lead to my last slide or second last. So the only change from there, again, we alluded to the counterattack against 9th Brigade on the left flank here, again, heading down in the direction of Carpiquet. They get pushed back by the 12th SS, some of those first encounters with 12th SS. So that flank is open again. That is a bit of a concern. And on the right, the Winnipegs are happily in Puteaux, but to their right, the 50th British Division has kind of veered away a little bit towards Bayeux. So a bit of an open flank on that side as well. And so it's sort of 7 Brigade, hunker down and hold on. And so the one change in dispositions that they make is to move Dog Company around to Cardinville Farm, which is sort of fairly well known. And those are their positions for the subsequent battles that Sean Claxton goes into in quite a bit more detail.
Yep.
Baker Company is a little bit different than often referred. I'm quite confident they were south of the railway. Sean and I worked that out, and they stayed there and sort of protecting the rear of Charlie Company a little bit. And that's a good look at the rising ground out of the Mew Valley for any counterattacks. And that's exactly how things sort of work out as it happens. So definitely last one, very light casualties on D-Day, D+1. But again, a bit of fighting in the Mew Valley as they make their way to those final objectives. So that's all I have. Sorry, Brad.
No worries.
Talk about how fast or how slow this might go as usual.
It's all good. Yeah. So we have some questions, if that's all right. If you have a little bit more time. One from Sheldrake. I think it's a good one. So there's the website again. I'll just leave that up for a second in case somebody wants for it after. What do you think of the Storming Juno movie with?
I thought it was good. It's been a long time since I've seen it. It's hard to find it showing up on History Channel or anything these days. Yeah. If we show anything but that on the History Channel. But I thought it was reasonably good. Told some good stories. To be honest, I had a tiny bit of involvement in helping them with some research, and I was nowhere close to the amount of detail. So there are probably some things here that I could have tried to help with. It's questions that they had. What did the seawall look like? How were things laid out and stuff like that? So probably help that I could have provided, but provides a pretty good overview. Talks about Bill Grayson, of course, and a couple of other stories from D-Day. Yeah, and I think I don't know any difference, but sorry, I think I answered it from the Great Dominion about air support, and this was I think asked as they're pushing towards the. Sorry, my brain gets jumbled at the end. At the end of D-Day, if there's any air support at all. Yeah, towards Riviere, nothing that's ever mentioned. So that doesn't mean it wasn't there, just that they didn't notice it or didn't record it necessarily. I think the general idea is the air power is a little farther inland. All inland, as far as I know as well. Rather than in close support. Yeah, that's as far as I know, because that's come up as well in other live streams about D-Day and 7th Brigade with Mike Bechtold and all that. It's inland, and also it's not coordinated yet. They haven't figured that out yet, and it's still confusing at this point, as you already alluded to. It's still a lot of confusion of what's certainly this by no means to communicate with them. With the big thing. So. I did not know this. I assume Sheldrick is mentioning the movie. It's still for sale. Through the JBC. I wonder if they do it online for sale as well. I don't know.
Not sure, to be honest. Alex would know. I don't. Yeah, I don't think just lots of praise for the presentation, Kevin. So people did not mind that you went over. So that's all good. Yeah, people love the detail, and that was really engaging. Sorry, I just kind of let you go for most of that because I didn't want to stop it because I wanted to hear. So this is a really great way to cover these things, like we were already talking about. Getting it down. Yeah, try to get down to the battalion level and understanding the companies and all that, and also the way you've gone about looking at it. Because I think I agree, particularly with the initial assault phase that you're mentioning about where they're landing. With what you found, it concurs with what I read from the first Hussars perspective of these things as these things are coming up. That's the perspective I got too, was they did a flanking run basically and came around. That's as far as I can understand it as well from what I was able to find with my very limited resources and time into it. But yeah,
something I appreciate with a proper historian like yourself, sort of amalgamating all those things. I have huge trouble with that. You look at the Regina's account, and then you jump to the Hussars account to try to fit that in, and then jump back again to reintegrate the integration, and I find that really, really hard work. And so I appreciate people that can do that kind of work.
It's not easy, and this is why it's so difficult to do, and to do it well, to get all these different accounts, line them up, all these different factors involved, right? Like, just as an example, sorry, I'm just going to go on for a minute here, but when you're mentioning the delay, right, coming in, literally the official first run, with the DDs, there's versus ours, even the accounts of that is confusing. They're like debating what to do, and there's disagreements and arguments about what's going on and why and all this stuff. So to time from that is difficult, right? Like what you've done is very helpful in terms of understanding all of that, because it's complicated, it's confusing, locations get mixed up, guns get mixed up, especially at the assault phase, right? Because that's one thing I had to contend with, is where are they shooting at, right? Because they're like, oh, I shot at the 88, but I'm like, post evidence doesn't make any sense, right? So I really appreciate what you're doing, because this is amazing that you've done all of this. Like, it just blows my mind that you've been doing all of this. It's amazing. So
I was gonna mention timings as well. So going back to those pictures of the initial landings again, Stephen Fisher's interpretation, and he makes very clear nobody agrees exactly on when the AVREs landed. There's 3 different sources, so it's very hard to precisely time things and try to rationalize all these different accounts.
Yeah, well, this is actually a really good point, and something I did not think about, but it's a great point from Sheldrake, who knows, again, these stuff really well, and especially now, is the monuments influence how we think about these things, which I think is right. I think that's a good point to make, because the plaques kind of dictate where these things are talked about, right? So I think that plays into this.
Yep, I was going to point it out on the picture of Grayson's pub.
Yeah,
it is. You can see it there, sort of right on the edge of the beach.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. Yeah, so sorry, I think that's all the questions we have. Yeah, and then Great Dominion mentions also the bad weather that comes after D-Day, D+1, and then eventually it gets much worse, right? Because it takes out a whole, Mulberry Harbor and everything. So the weather is not great, and that plays a factor into air support as well. Yeah, so everyone's just loving what you saw, what you were given, and people came in late, like Lorelei, another great supporter of the channel. It's going to go back to the beginning once we finish, which I highly suggest for anyone who came in late to go back to the beginning, because you laid this out in a great way. So thanks, Kevin, for coming on.
Okay, I do appreciate that. If anybody has comments or feedback, I'm always open to information or misinterpretation from a layman. Contact me through my website, or if you have a Regina Rifles connection, I'm always happy to do a little digging into my records and my information, and see if I can provide a little bit more detail for anybody with an interest.
Yeah, and just for anyone, this is for anyone watching the recorded version. If you can't get, for some reason, having trouble finding the website, don't remember it, come to me as well. I'm easily accessible. Everything's down below in the description. Same with the website, so you should be able to find it through there. But just in case, because I want Kevin to keep doing this great stuff, come to me if you need to, and I will get you in touch with Kevin if that's ever necessary. If that's okay, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because there's lots of I have people coming to me, so not so much recently, but maybe as of today and as of after tomorrow, that may happen. So
you'll not be rid of me either, I should.
Good. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick sign off, and then we'll both say goodbye together. All right.
Very good. Thanks, everyone.
So thanks everyone for watching. This one got a little longer than normal, but I think it was totally worth it, particularly bringing that story together. And then just as Kevin mentioned, connecting to the live stream we did with Sean Claxton and all of that great story and everything that goes on at Bretteville and the environments. So much going on. It's a confusing time period, so I think these things are really helpful to bring all of this together. And this front, I'll probably say this again maybe tomorrow because I'm planning on doing another live stream or just kind of hang out and ask questions. Anybody wants to come on, more than welcome to do it, just like I did with Remembrance Day back last year. So I'll probably just hang out for a little bit. So yeah, so thanks everyone for watching. Tomorrow, of course, is the anniversary of D-Day. And I'll just mention that live stream, but also tomorrow night Eastern time, 7 p.m. Will be Mark Milner. Really excited for that one. He knows his stuff. He's been a huge influence on how I go about doing things. So I'm really excited to finally get him on the channel and really talking about all the different angles and all the different areas he breaks this down. It's going to be one that you're going to want to see. And anyone after as well watching the recorded version of this, definitely check it out because it's going to be a good one. Hasn't happened yet, but it's going to be good because he knows his stuff. So thanks again, Kevin. So I will see everyone tomorrow, and I think this is a good place comment from the GD to leave off on. So thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.